Go. Welcome, Zac Turner.
Hey, David.
Let's have a conversation.
All right, yeah, definitely. So, what did we want to talk about today?
I want to start off with something, okay? I want to start with a sacred cow. I want to start off with something that people don't want to touch, especially because I was an elder in a couple different black churches. A lot of times people really put Martin Luther King in a very sacred place. Like if you're quoting Martin Luther King, that's all cool. And the problem is the theology of Martin Luther King. I don't have a problem with the general idea of Christianity being a part of the public discourse, or Christianity and the values of Christianity is such as in social issues. I don't really have a problem with that. But I do have a problem with Christianity becoming the social gospel that it has become, to the injury of the plan of salvation concept. Justification by faith becomes a very minimal idea. So what was fascinating is in all this research I was doing on my documentary on the apostasy stuff, well, some of the influences that influence what's called liberation theology, Black liberation theology, where they call Union, Union College or something like that, that's out in the East Coast. That's where you get all of these ideas from Tillich and all these other kind of folks that teach what is called process theology. So I think what I'd like to do is break down what process theology is, where it comes from, and why actually it is a direct attack to justification by faith and the fundamentals of the gospel. And it's all based out of mysticism and philosophical pantheism.
All right.
Yeah, and so they said it's funny how I think Satan comes in. He comes in through very acceptable means,
And you told me, because in our conversation the other day, which is where we got this idea to do this Skype call, Martin Luther King was into Illich, right? Is that how you say it?
Tillich, yeah.
Tillich. Okay,
yeah.
Tillich. And did he have these ideas of process theology, or?
Yeah, very much so. His dissertation was on the work of Tillich and this guy named, I think is Henry Nelson, what's his last name? I forget. But, both of these guys that, that he did his dissertation on, I think it's Weissman or something like that. But anyway, these guys were process theology. What is process theology? It's, we would call it, they would call it process theory. They would call it's this whole conglomerate of existential ideas where, here's the bottom line. This is what's fascinating. I'll start off with the shocker. Is they believe that God isn't the God that we all believe in. They don't really believe in, and this is the school that Martin Luther King comes from. They don't believe in God as we believe in God. They believe that God is an expression of vitality, of energy that speaks through humanity, that speaks through social issues, that speaks through human beings. So the entire theology is built on self-actualization and self-realization and self-validation. And you become the God making change and the change agent of God making his movement and expressing himself in society, but not the God in heaven. We collectively make up that God. The God mind, the God consciousness is expressed through human activity, especially through social and political expression.
So then it's more, because a lot of times we use illustrations like, oh, this is a disease in society or whatnot. That would be taken more literal, like spiritually literal.
Well, yeah, that's a fascinating point. Yeah, because they would literally believe that we collectively, such as people like Schleiermacher, Hegel, where you get the Hegelian dialectic, they all believed in this pagan process theology, what's called triadic ontology. In other words, every, quote, thought or idea has an intrinsic contradiction to it. When that contradiction eventually expresses itself as other or in an antithesis to it, there becomes a revolution or a conflict. Through the conflict between the theses and the antitheses comes a resolve that creates a synthesis, and that synthesis is the new theory, which will have an inherent contradiction. And that inherent contradiction causes it to break off, and then now to be a conflict with each other. And then the resolution is a synthesis, and you have temporary peace or resolve, and then it starts off, and this is this process every time, right?
Okay, yeah.
This is this process every single time. And they call that process theology, or ontological concepts about God. And they believe that that is God, that dynamic is God. That's the part that people don't understand. They believe that constant movement and change, it changes the rules because the theory is new, the context is new. So therefore the law is new, the morality is new, the ethics
Okay.
is new. It changes with the ontological change.
Okay, because you hear that, and maybe Christian circles couldn't explain it like that, but you definitely hear like, oh, God changes with the times, or like God is love absolutely, and you can see that because we're learning how to love more, or something like that. Like the whole like liberal agenda based off of like, oh, everyone needs to be able to love, and then they associate that's what God is now. He's all about love.
Yeah,
Which
and that
God
love,
is love, but that's not this. We're not defining it the same. All of a sudden, we're changing God, because we're changing what love means.
yeah, they mean
But
love means process.
yeah,
Love means dynamic and change. And so and then the idea of the principle of love is what they would call this idea of emergent theology. People talk about like the emergent church movement, stuff like that. Well, they didn't invent anything. The concept of emergent came from a 19th century basic theologian, who was also, it was a science term. It's the idea of when a system of things start to kind of find intercommunication, and then they all kind of come together, and something emerges as a collective that couldn't be accomplished individually. That they all kind of join in to create a certain thing, a dynamic, or whatever it is. And that dynamic, whatever emerges, that collective whole becomes the greater whole than any specific part.
okay,
Does that make sense? Like, let's say you're a part of a movement, you're a part of a group of people, and even though this is the concept of this ontological idea,
yeah,
even if you are not compatible with these other things, that's what intersectionality is now. This intersectionality is, let's find the common enemy or whatever it is. So it doesn't matter how we contradict or we're against each other in so many other things. This one thing becomes the emerging unifying bond between us, and this one thing supersedes everything else. And so now we are given over to the identity of this one common thing, even though it's filled with contradiction all around. So the acceptance of that is called love or
right,
reality.
okay. So it's almost as if like you have, let's see if I got this, liberal parties, Republican parties, they have their various intellects, they have their voters, different layers, but they're grouped into one party. But this idea is basically all of society, all of world. And the way you're describing it, it makes me think that you can develop kind of a tendency towards Neoplatonism.
It's more
Is
than a
that
tendency, it's an essential tool to make that happen, because you're supposed to erase distinctions in your mind with Neoplatonism. All distinctions have to be erased. We have to find and only see the commonality. That's the whole point of Neoplatonism. So, what's a really good example of that would be, you have like Antifa people. Let's look at just recent social political stuff. And then you have feminists. And then you have Muslim people. And then you have LGBT community. And they're all going rah, rah, rah in the same street protests. But if you look at each one of them independently, they virtually are intensely antagonistic to the other. Like, we're talking, the Antifa people are communists and anarchists, but mostly communists.
right?
They're Marxists. What do they
Yeah.
have to do at all with anything with the LGBT movement or with Islam. There is
Right.
nothing that they would have in common, especially even feminism. Communism and Marxism is not a real feminist friendly kind of situation. The same thing with Islam. Islam is not very accepting towards feminism, nor is it accepting toward the LGBT, nor is it at all accepting of anarchism, nor of communism. They believe in a Sharia law. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're
And
not the friends you think they are.
you'll kind of get like the remarks from like the women's right movement or LGBT. It's always like anti-Christian. You see them most often, but like if you talk to women's right movement, like their first concern if dealing with religion should be is Islam, the
It should
Muslim
be,
faith.
yeah. Logically
You know what I
speaking,
mean?
yeah,
Based on how the religion is structured, like yes, it's different.
yeah.
Like Christianity, we at least we believe like when Eve was formed from Adam, a rib was taken out of Adam to equate them, right? Not from the head, not from the foot, the superior or inferior part of Adam, but to equal, the rib which represented the equal plane between Adam and Eve, and that's the most balanced. They both have a different function in the family, but it's the balance. So if I don't want to get sidetracked too much, but like right. So basically, they should be focusing on Muslims if they are truly what if
Yeah.
they're trying to get what they're talking about.
Yeah, so this concept of process theology, which is ontological ideas, and they're going to feelings, that their self-expression is the great God of it. Self-actualization, self-identity, that's what those groups are having an intersection. Anti-absolutism, that's where their intersections are. So really they're joining in on the idea of anti-absolute, anti-objective reality or objective truth. And so it would be an anti kind of sense of order, because they're embracing all forms of just self-expression. That's all they're really joining together on, even though if any one of those groups were ever established as a whole in society, it would be absolutely intolerant to one another.
Right.
They're only joined in on the deconstructionism of the whole thing. That's all they're
Right.
joined in. Or the idea of self-expression is being. Now
And
that's the key.
that's all Satan wants. He wants everyone to get on board the deconstruction train
Yeah.
because you can't outwit when it comes back to, reforming those thoughts.
Yeah,
You're going to end up all in the same place.
yeah, all in a glob of nothingness.
Right.
It's and the charge, the excitement, the horse that they're riding into their own destruction, into the burning flames, is self-actualization, self-identity, self-expression, beating your chest and saying, "I exist, I am." And it's this is the definition of God. That's what Romanticism is, and that's what a lot of people don't understand. We have labels for stuff, but it's the same product, different labels. Romanticism, it was nothing but that. It is the idea of just even nonsensical, if it's even that, or expressionism, or it could be whatever it is. But even art was this idea that that's the ultimate form of showing God expression throughout society, because it is trying to grasp these abstract concepts and expressing them, and they're making them more real than life itself. So they start switching the what actually is being called real, or or authentic. And that's what the
That's
whole idea of art. The idea of art is supposed to be, we are now attributing a sense of reality in being to abstractions, an expression of abstractions. And we're literally, what ontological means, or epistemological, we're actually calling those things reality, because this reality is an ever shifting sense of expression instead of an objective, eternal, I change not reality, which is the
yeah.
opposite of the Bible.
And I guess to them though, postmodernism is their gospel because you need that subjective subjective morality, deconstruction of everything
Yeah.
to get along. And you know what I mean? There is no other option. I mean, we know there's the option of being under Christ, united in Christ, which will bring ultimate peace and joy and pleasure to everybody.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? That's their gospel, I guess.
Well,
So
you're describing a bunch of people jumped out of an airplane without a parachute. They're all giving each other hugs on the way down.
That was good. Yep, that's a good picture. That's what's going on right now. And so you said, I'm gonna say his name wrong.
Tillich.
Tillich?
Tillich with a T.
So when Martin Luther King was doing the whole civil rights movement,
exactly.
What was he saying that was so? Did he say anything like blatantly?
No, well, here's the whole thing. If you study Tillich was actually one of his professors. So there's no distant connection there. That Tillich used to call him up, and they used to have phone conversation when Tillich died in 1967 or whenever he died, or 62 or something, I forget. But anyway, when Tillich died, Martin Luther King wrote a whole thing on it and everything else because that was his real mentor. Tillich is coming from a school of thought in the eastern seaboard of the United States, that form of Protestantism, which we get what's called liberalism. But it's not really liberal per se. It's really enlightenment, philosophical, existential.
Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah, it's all bringing all the mystical ideas and still trying to call it Christianity, even though it's a very sad kind of label to throw Christianity on something that is so absolutely based upon concepts of philosophy. And I mean, we're talking about pantheistic philosophy, blatantly. Like literally, if you go into more the academic research of this whole thing, it would be classically labeled as pantheism. It's the concepts of pantheisms that they themselves even say, well, there is forms of Stoicism and there is forms of, I forget the other group that were the atomists or whatever, the Epicureans. So there's Epicurean and Stoicism in it, but, so they're really just trying to turn this idea of, are we autonomous little islands and we're just out there in chaos and really we're just, what's the word? What's that period in the early 20th century of art that was called Impressionism, but absurdism.
Absurdism, okay.
So there's absurdism. So it's the idea that nothing means anything anyway, so whatever we express is the only thing that has meaning to it. We, in our self-expression, is the only order in this chaotic universe, and therefore we attribute meaning to it because we're the only orientation that orders itself. Everything else is just chaos. So therefore, we express ourselves. See, expressionism came out of absurdism. We express ourselves because nothing means anything. So our expression is the meaning. We create meaning. We express ourselves, we attribute meaning to it, and that's our logos. That's what reality is. We've created it. We're gods that made order out of chaos. And that's the essence of Romanticism. That's it.
Yeah, we were talking about too the narrative of people that feeds right into that. You get to create your own narrative because based on how you feel, based on what you're creating in your environment, that determines your narrative, and that's what actually is. And I'm gonna get this wrong too, but C.S. Lewis, what was he into again? What was we were talking about like what he really liked. He liked the philosophies and stuff. But was there C.S.
Lewis and Tolkien and all them? Well, the Inklings, when you want to get into Oxford was absolutely inundated with Hellenism, Greek culture, Greek philosophy, a lot of the Nordic and Celtic concepts. That's why in the writings of C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, you get a lot of the Celtic, Nordic, mythical god kind of feeling to it. The reason is that that's a big part of Oxford's kind of quasi-Christian theology, had a ton of Hellenistic and Nordic mystical Neoplatonism. In other words, they lined up those stories in the power of myth. Joseph Campbell did a series called The Power of Myth, and he takes all the hero stories, the Harumphat stories, the the divine lover stories. He takes all these stories and said, look at all the cultures all throughout history are telling the same story as Christianity, but we think that they're telling it just a little bit better than the Christians. The Christians actually believed their stuff. Nobody actually believed that all this other stuff was real. So Neoplatonism is trying to line itself up with Christianity and attaching itself, seeing Christianity as a myth. Everyone's been trying to express this myth from Phoenician times to the Mithrix to whatever, and so that state of mind, that form of teaching is in a lot of, this is what people don't understand, is in a lot of seminaries. Yeah. That's why a lot of people come out of seminary with a deconstructed faith and this idea that Christianity is really a mix of philosophies, a mix of Judaism, a mix of mysticism, a mix of culturism, a mix of all kinds of stuff. And they walk out of there with just this kind of indistinct concepts because of Hellenism. Hellenism, the whole purpose of Hellenism was the Greeks would take all the various thoughts and ideas and disciplines and spiritualities out there and to try to pull them together so that society could all get along under one roof. So they were doing everything as a form of peacemaking, as a form, that's why Rome took over the Greek Hellenism and they built roads everywhere and they gave kind of these places their autonomy as long as they pay road taxes and stuff like that. But it's the idea of like, well, we all believe the same thing. I'm here to empower. So the government would build, finance building some of these cathedrals and these pagan temples and stuff like that.
So wait,
because they're saying that these are all in harmony with each other.
So then, what's the point of religion to them, though?
It's they call it a necessary narrative for humanity to make sense of mystical ideas.
Okay, so I guess so. It's just necessary. So like.
Yeah, like kind of like sucking your thumb.
Is that why philosophy is glorified? Because it's like got metaphysics. Like it's the intelligent version of what you couldn't express.
Well, they would use what a lot of people don't understand about, quote, science is that a lot of scientific experiment was all built on philosophy. With the Stoics, it was that everything was interconnected. Where you get string theory and ether theory and all this other kind of stuff all came from the Stoics. And they're trying to prove that what I believe philosophically can play itself out metaphysically and physically, because what is so on earth is so in the metaphysical realm. So they would conduct experiments to prove their points on Mars Hill. Aristobulus, what they called Mars Hill, where Paul went and he spoke.
Yeah.
Well, the Epicureans and the Stoics would come there. They would come with their lectures. They would use all of these various techniques, but they would also present their experiments and say, look, my theory is right. And then, so one would be the atomization, which is the Epicureans, that all things are independent. They're all just kind of living their own existence. The only reason that they even get along is for self-interest, but everything is in atomic form. So they believed in that the universe is made up of particles. It wasn't Einstein. These guys were way back BC talking about this stuff. So,
that's like now modern science. It's like we know the particles, like when they're observed, they act one way. When they don't, they act another way. One like a wave, one like.
We assume that we use that way to describe it, but those are the same schools of thoughts that they've always had. That's always assumed in the two paradigms. There's only two paradigms in science because they were all coming from a philosophical base.
Okay, but it's interesting, and I'm not trying to get sidetracked right now, but Paul says, this is the God you worshipped and you didn't know, and it almost feeds into their idea. Like
a little bit, but it's an apple in a cesspool. Okay. Go to the apple tree. Don't jump in the cesspool to jump after an apple. There might be some little nuggets of truth, but Paul isn't saying that this is your worship to the unknown God. What was the unknown God to them? They didn't know the unknown God. To them, it was like the concept of the worship of mystery. Because there was always supposed to be, it's like putting zero in a numerical system in pagan thought. Societies that did not have a zero only advanced so far. So what they discovered is when zero was brought into the numerical system, that it utterly changed the game. Now you brought a
Really?
zero. You brought a zero factor in, and it changed their technology. It changed how they did measurements. It changed how they did concepts of theory of mathematics and economics. Zero changed everything. There's whole
Really?
studies and research on zero.
That's interesting.
And then so it's the idea of the Greeks saying, okay, let's make a zero in this. The unknown God. The zero factor.
Okay.
The unknown, what all we don't know. And then Paul says, well, I'm here to declare to you the zero. This is the infinite God that you said, okay, we always give ourselves the option to say, I know that I don't know. Oh, we brought zero into your metaphysical thinking system. It's like saying, but I don't know everything. It would be a form of saying that.
Okay,
So it leaves you
bridging the
open.
gap.
Yeah, you're just opening the option for progressive enlightenment.
So what happened after Martin Luther?
Well,
After he died, where was the Adventist Church at that time? Do you know?
yeah. Let me back up a little bit.
Okay.
What a lot of people don't understand is liberation theology. Liberation theology was a Jesuit Catholic theology that was back in the 30s. This is where Black Liberation Theology really comes from. And there's reasons why they studied the German intellectuals. All of these guys that I'm describing are all Schleiermacher, Tillich, are all German intellectuals. What is Black theologians doing studying German intellectuals, right? Well, that's what we're going to talk about.
Okay.
Is before Martin Luther King was this major movement within Christianity, the very liberal, Catholics love to call it Protestant, but we would call it kind of philosophical enlightenment, super liberal Christianity. You know, it has nothing to do with basic, good old-fashioned Christianity. But all the stuff coming out of Europe is very existential, and they're still trying to hold on to semblances of Christianity, but it's really heavily fortified with all these metaphysical, philosophical ideas and stuff, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, back in the late 1800s, the early 1900s, when there's the Industrial Revolution and America was really hitting the accelerator as far as being a power in this world. It pretty much was not a world power until the industrial age came over here. We started doing massive manufacturing and stuff like that. And then we started an entrepreneurialism and all the Protestant work ethic and everything else. And people started getting rich, and we started building up our Navy. Well, all of a sudden people are thinking, well, what's going on with the West? We have to have a philosophical understanding of this phenomenon called the West. And so a lot of these kind of what I would call tin horn philosophers and Christians were getting together with this idea that we have this great destiny to create a model for the rest of the world of how to run a diverse society. And that diverse society we've already modeled to the world, where we could have different cultures, different ethnics, different races, different religions, different classes. And everyone has a chance in what's called the American dream to all make it just based upon good principles, work ethics. It's not going to be built on a classist system. We're going to deconstruct classism. So with that, all of these East Coast guys, because this was the build-up to World War I. America wanted to stay the peaceful nation, a lamb-like beast. Want to stay a peaceful nation amongst all the worlds and not enter into a world war, as Europe uses war as a way to process change, to create change. It was a change agent. To agitate war was something that European has always done, and everyone's known that about Europe. They manufacture war as a form of gaining wealth. They create problems. They go to other countries. They colonize. They do all this crazy stuff.
It's been going on since Rome fell.
Since and before. Yeah. And before, actually. Colonization is no new thing. So, but America wanted to stay out of World War I. Well, once we said, no, there was a bigger purpose. We will join in World War I, but we will create what is called the League of Nations. Where once we have a world war, And it's this idea of this process theology. It was a theological, political, philosophical concept that says, this is what we're going to do then. We're going to agitate the world into a world war, and then we're going to create a theory and anti-theory and antithesis, and then we're going to, the solution, the resolve is going to be a League of Nations after the Paris peace talks. And so that's where we carved up the rest of the world, was after World War I. And all of these pro-American theologians who believed in what's called, this is where the term came from, since we have created a new world here in the United States, and there's a certain order that we have that no one else has that works for diverse cultures, we have the model for a new world order. That's where the term came from. It came from Christians, or people that call themselves Christians. We know how to create a Christianized philosophical world that was built more on Hegel's idea that we collectively make up God or the good. That we express ourselves. And it's a process of creating war against, that's the anti-theory to everything, is the agitative process is going to be, everything's going to be a war on whatever we need to have that ontological process with, that Hegelian process with. So if we call war against poverty, or we call war against drugs, or we call war against ignorance, or a war against anti-education, or whatever it is, we're going to call it a war against it.
Okay.
This is where all this stuff comes from. But we're going to take it through that process of theory, anti-theory, and create this big conflict out of it, and then the resolve, we're going to keep doing that to the point where everything becomes a new world order, an order where we can all be diverse, but all get along, everyone's equal, and there's no distinction, and yet everyone be divided up into their collective groups, collectivism. And there could be advocacy for your identified groups. And as groups keep emerging, and they start to identify themselves as, well, I'm going to make a group built upon self-expression of my sexuality. And we're a new identified group, and we're the new minority group. That's why they identify as a minority group. Right. It's a part of this ideology. It's a part of a philosophical process theology that they will be identified as the new victim group. And the entire concept of Samuel Zane Batten and all those people of the Brotherhood of the Kingdom, they're the ones that created the social justice gospel. They're the ones that created agitating in the communities and creating wars on whatever, and then collecting groups into new groups that would identify themselves as the workers groups or the blue collar groups or the whatever groups. And they're the new minority, and then they have to be at war with whatever is supposedly their oppressor in, quote unquote, this mythical beast called society. Society is doing this. That's where we get the term from. Society says that women should be skinny, and society, really? Society said that? Well, I got to go have a conversation with society. I got to find out what society's saying. Why is society so opinionated? You know? Society says that women need to. Society says that men have to. Society says, and we use that term as if that's a natural term, but it was an artificially introduced term.
So then anyone can pop up, though. Any group can come up.
It's endless.
There can always be a new minority. And then the problem with that is that...
all they have to do is self-identify in a social setting.
And just like, like a domino, you knock down... If that little group comes up, then if all other groups are kind of under this umbrella idea, they all have to now adjust to that group. And then you can just keep going until what?
Well, here's the problem. Here's the problem that was created from it is the newly identified collective group that calls itself the new oppressed group.
Yeah.
Piggybacks on the victim righteousness of their preceding groups. Okay? But here's the problem. The preceding groups that claimed, like, we're the new kids on the block with our victim righteousness, don't like the new kids on the block. So you get people saying that identify myself as black. So you get these black people saying, oh, hells no. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or you get people that have been gay for a long time and then bisexual say, well, I'm both saying, oh no, well, you haven't paid the price of us gays. We've been paying prices for the longest time. You're not going to come up, do some little college thing and then leave and say, oh, I think I'm bi, and then get all the benefits of our hard work. So
That's interesting.
that's what really happens, actually. Nobody likes to be beat out on being the new identified victim group. So they're creating a patch up, like kind of like when you have a bug in a computer, they send a patch.
Mm-hmm.
The patch up is what's called intersectionality. Well, let's find the one thing that we can all say we've been victimized by. Let's find a bigger evil or a bigger society. Well, it's always going to be people that have objective moral fabric to them. Objective moral fabric makes you the big giant wildebeest that all the natives are pointing their arrows at.
Objective or subjective?
Objective. You have to understand, you're the target against that. You're the bad guy. You're the identified scapegoat. You're the problem. You're the moral stagnant one. Okay. Not validating them.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And then it creates an environment too where if you a way to survive is to become a victim, because then you're gaining benefits that way, or at least in theory, you'd be gaining benefits that way.
Yeah. So let's. Do you mind if I do a little bit of rewind for you?
Yeah, do that.
Is this group Samuel Zane Batten and the Kingdom of the Brotherhood? Well, I have their books. I literally have their books in my library right now. I could go and get a stack of about 4 of their books. Problem is, people don't read their books. They said this is how we're going to change society, is by guilting people, making people aware that no matter what they do, they will never not be victimizing you. Whatever you do in your response to my complaints will never be good enough. To hold that guilt to their face, no matter what they do, is a tactic. And these people were writing this stuff back in 1919. This isn't new. I got it. I'll show you the books. And so they said this is the way to force change, that you cry for justice, and when they give you your demands, you say, but it's still wrong. You're still wrong for what you think. Well, you don't know what I think. No, I know what you think because you can't change what you think because you're white and male.
Right.
You already have a DNA prejudice and you don't know it. It's like a fish trying to describe the water that he's in. So since that's already a permanent bias in your mind, you could never do right. I will always be superior to you. And I will always be the dictator of what the change needs to be. So they see that as a form of accelerated social evolution, that you get to force the change by designated people to these roles that they could never appease their guilt. The guilt that you've assigned to them. They could never satisfy it.
All right, okay. And then we see that now. And one of your favorite topics, too, is like the omega point. And this is related to the omega point, right?
In a huge way, because if you want to study Tillich, you want to study Wyman, this is Martin Luther's whole thing. So this is what I'm going to get is to the black kind of theology thing of this whole thing, is that it doesn't make any sense, why would Martin Luther King and all this other kind of stuff be involved in it? Well, liberation theology came from Jesuits out of Latin America. And it's this idea that the poor are more noble because they're poor, and the rich are innately evil because they're rich. So there was the virtue of poverty, and the virtue of the rights of the impoverished, and the virtue that you have in righteousness by being a victim. Being the victim and being poor, you automatically have righteousness by virtue of your status.
Right.
The Kingdom of the Brotherhood latched on to that theology and was pushing it through American inner cities, and they were doing things like all the social justice causes that, quote, they rallied up minorities.
What did they do? They just have
through meetings, through lectures, they would talk to people and tell them their victim status, and then they would community organize.
Liberation theology seminars?
Yeah, but they wouldn't call that. They would call it women's workers' rights, or
Okay. What
Negro
did they?
Negro equality of the white man. But they would go into oppressed workers kind of
Okay.
situations. They would be a part of union movements. They would be a part of speeches to organize workers. They were attaching themselves to a lot of good social things that would help out people, and but there was an ideology that was being inculcated through this, and they were very deliberate about this whole thing. The main target, and this is where I'm trying to get to, the main target was black seminary students.
Really?
Yeah, that was their main target. So they created Union College, where Tillage taught and stuff like this, to normalize this very ontological, very pantheistic, very expression of self by using biblical themes. Now, Martin Luther King did not believe in the God we believe in, but he definitely believed in the Christianization narrative that a struggle of a people group is completely the
Yeah.
same thing as the Exodus.
Mm-hmm.
And using
Malcolm X used that too.
well, yeah, because they're all from the same ideas. It's so inculcated in black consciousness, Black
Yeah.
Liberation Theology, that you can go to Oakwood College and half the people there believe all this stuff. That's why they have people like Cornell West and all these people out there talking. Cornell West of all people. You know what I mean? Like, these are people that are completely immersed in this it's atheism. They would, in theological circles, they know to call this atheism because they don't believe in the need of atonement, or they borrow the language because it's very familiar, and it's whatever can access people. All you're doing
Right.
is just borrowing language to access their souls, their mind, to form a sense of identity with something that they're already identified with, but kind of hijacking on that, piggybacking into their consciousness. And so that's the whole idea. And so but the idea is to take everyone from, uh, the real themes of the Bible and the gospel, to to bringing them down to the earth, to social, experiential self-expressionism. And that's where you get the terms like my truth, my truth, my truth. It's a big thing. It's a big thing
Yeah.
around here, man. There's truth, but that's fairyland. But then there's my truth, my truth,
Okay.
my truth, my experience, my being, my expression, my truth. And everyone's, well,
Yep.
so everyone's at a fight for who's more street legit with their truth. That's why you even see politicians now, they'll do this. They all know what that means.
Really?
That's a dog whistle, yeah.
Huh.
Watch it.
That's interesting. I will.
Yeah.
I will be watching that.
Because this is the idea. It's all about me, the grand and glorious me. We always try to get back to that, but people don't understand that is the Death Star. That's the big, giant gravitational pull. And for some strange reason, we kind of get into this, okay, Jesus is my Savior, and in heaven, there's a righteousness that God is going to impute to me based upon Christ, and it'll be legitimized by what he writes down in the books of heaven. Yeah, far away. What? Oh, what was all that garbage again about that fairy tale? But what about my feelings and my experiences, what I'm going through? What about my truth? You hear that? You hear that beat?
Right.
That's my heart, baby. This is where truth is. It's me and my life, my expression, my experiences, what expresses itself through me. And people are calling that Christianity.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, I think more than just like Christians are buying into it. I think more like, I work at a Reform Jewish temple. I mean, basically that's what they believe now too, or at least Reform. Most of them do, because a lot of them are liberal.
Well, what's Reform Judaism come from? It comes from deconstructionism. The natural outcrop of deconstructionism was called Reconstructionism, and it wasn't it wasn't a adversarial to the idea. Once you deconstruct something, now you have to reform it, but it has new meaning. It's basically literary, psychological recycling. You
And it's
bring all this
interesting.
truth, you break it down, and then you reshape it, and then you give it a different name.
And it's interesting because I think I'm kind of curious to ask you more about the Omega point too.
Yeah, we're going to
But
get there.
their idea of the Messiah is not a person, but an era.
Yeah.
You know, so that fits perfectly with like Neoplatonism, and like you're heading towards the era or the Messiah. You
Yeah,
know?
it's perfect. It's a perfect eschatological end time setup for the persecution of the saints at the end of time, who are going to believe in an objective righteousness, the commandments of God, their faith in Christ, who is their righteousness. All this objective truthism, trust me, they are going to be very out of vogue real soon here. Because it's not just out of vogue, that's all we are already, but you're going to become hostile to the new consciousness that's going to be essential for us to have this fifth dimensional breakthrough where we could finally realize that all religion was one giant storytelling fantasy that kept us cocooned so we could live, with ourselves. But now it's time to shed all of that. Yeah. Reality is that we are who we've been waiting for.
I had a friend's dad actually tell me, like, Zach, I can't wait till you're mature enough to realize everyone has a truth that works for them. I'm like, if I realized that, I wouldn't be saying I'm Christian. I wouldn't believe that you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
I would have to throw out Christianity. Like, I wouldn't be a Christian. You can't just say, like, oh, I'm Christian, but now I'm a mature Christian, and I believe everyone has their own truth. Like, that made no sense to me. And
why does Satan love that so much?
Yeah.
Why does Satan love to deposit truth in you?
And it sounds good. You know what I mean? It makes me look like I'm like immature or something, because I'm like, no, I believe in something objective. I believe in Christ's righteousness. I believe in obeying God.
It's the whole experience of when God shows up, we're going to say, oh, he's the Lord and I'm not. That's okay. You won't analyze that one.
Right.
All this cheap analysis is because he's away. But when he shows up, we're not going to be sitting there talking about the reality that is me. And this is the whole idea. It's always this concept of self-expression, self-identity is what makes up that reality. We're building on the shakiest foundation in the universe. A bunch of dying people are calling themselves reality.
and it's our imagination, just like right before the flood. Yeah. Their imagination was wicked continually. It's like it was their imagination.
Yeah.
Like it was a daydream. It
building on
real.
Yeah, build. It's like somebody boasting, and then that they're going to beat up Mike Tyson. Then they walk in the ring and they're knocked out one punch.
Right.
Like that's what we are. We're that goofy ding dong with our hat all cocked, talking all this big talk, throwing gang signs. Then we walk in the ring, Tyson, and then he literally kills us with one punch. And and everyone's at the funeral service, and everyone's too nice to remind everybody of the big talk of how he's going to just kill Mike Tyson. That's all we are. We're that guy right now.
That's funny.
Yeah, it's a sad thing. But that's all we're doing right now. We're talking like a drunk.
Yeah.
We're talking like a drunk in the face of a bouncer who's sober.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I'll just kick your butt. I was an MMA fighter. The guy's like, get out of here. You know what I mean? Oh, why did he do that?
Yeah.
That's us.
Or if you're the one sober guy at a party and everyone else is drinking, and one drunk person says something, and all the other drunk kids are like, "Oh, that's right, bro. You got it."
Oh, dang! Oh.
They all agree too. It's like groupthink forms like real quick,
It creates a real fomentation of confidence, but there's no substance to it.
No substance.
When God is talking and identifying truth and reality in himself, there's no braggadocio. There's no embellishing. God is meek and humble and lowly, and he kind of understates himself. I remember I had a stereo like that once. I bought this incredible stereo that was 300 watts per channel, and it had one little tiny blinking, not a blinking, but one red light to tell you that the power was on. You turn it on, one tiny little red light that was a square, and you turn on that sound, you're like, whoa, whoa! And then I would buy these super lights, bells, whistles, Jack in a Box on it and everything else, and sirens. And then it would be like not even half the sound.
Right.
And that is really the Lord times infinity. Like, he has that little red light on, powers on, but it's something when he is going to just bring you into this reality when he shows up. And we're going to
No,
realize
that's
that
cool.
all of our talk was foam and meringue and whipped cream and fantasy and bubbles in the sunshine with our little bubble blowing. Whoo, my ontological deepness. Pop! Oh, what? And that's what the gospel's trying to do. But validation is happening through a false sense of confidence because you're getting a lot of people joining that idea. And there's this false sense that if you get enough people agreeing, it becomes real. You make it real. And so that's all people are doing now.
So where do we go next? What's our next step in this journey to understanding the omega point? Well, can we go there? Are we going to go there?
Yeah, we'll go there right now. You mean the omega point? Well, what is the omega point? P.S.
Well, basically, this is what I'm saying. Like we were talking about at the beginning, we want to uncover those calves and just point out just some major deception and then show how Satan, because we were talking about that before, he doesn't make his idea of Satan that he presents to you, or let me say this another way. Satan is not trying to create a false religion that's like Satanism. Like that's like the least effective way for him to deceive people.
At most, it's a decoy. He winds up and sends off that way.
Right, like that's just the bad guy. That's the obvious bad guy. Okay, we've done that. You know, he's got to create other religions that just parallel slightly.
Right. What we're talking about here is that all Satan has to do. The word anti or antichrist means to mimic something to replace it. So when people think of antichrist, they usually think, oh, it's in direct opposition, it's black and white. No, it's not that at all. It's the idea is to replace something. It's the idea of, like, for example, it would be like going to McDonald's to have a nutritional meal. Like I was starving. I really am ready for a nice, wonderful, nutritional meal. Then you go to McDonald's, you're like, I'm full. I've already eaten. I've had McDonald's. I actually feel kind of greasy and nauseous. I'm gonna lay down, take a nap. That's Satan. He is. You're getting the impression that this is what is going to satiate. It's a replacement, but it doesn't do the job. And the reality is God is trying to say that, no, I'm telling you the truth. So Satan does a lot of mimicry. For example, can I give you an example?
Absolutely.
An example would be this, let's talk about Jesus Christ. What's wrong with that? Look at all the virtues of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was a radical. Jesus Christ was a social reformer. Jesus Christ mingled amongst the poor. Jesus Christ was a sympathetic. And then that lines up with Jesus Christ is an avatar. Jesus Christ is a bodhisattva. Jesus Christ was reached nirvana in godhood. He's the perfect tale for if you want to just talk the wonders of Jesus Christ as God manifest in humanity, and he has shown us what that experience and what that looks like as a model, as an experience for us to attain to, that he achieved a consciousness that is for all of us and available for all of us, and wonderful thing that this is a perfect antichrist, because you're embracing the idea of Christ, but you're replacing it. But what suffers? What's the nutrition you're not getting in that meal? The atonement of justification by faith. The very Magna Carta and the crown jewel of the gospel is substitutionary righteousness. Is absolutely left out of the equation. So you're sitting there with your giant McDonald's meal in your stomach, taking a nap, and the reality is you never got what you really needed.
Turns out there's rat poison in it.
Yeah, turns out that there was a rat in it.
Yeah.
You were eating a rat. They cut the head and the arms off.
Nice rat patty.
Like, why is it still fighting me? So,
but I feel like it's a hamburger.
yeah. I tell myself, I close my eyes and I'm gonna pretend that those were bones, or I didn't hear a squeal. Shut up! Shut up!
Yeah.
But here, I mean, so we're gonna get to the mega point. The point being is that you can deconstruct the essence of Christianity through attaching yourself to images of Christianity, if that helps. You can talk of paralleling the slavery of America and the slavery of the Jews in Egypt, and then parallel civil rights laws with crossing through the Red Sea and destroying Pharaoh, and just keep doing parallels, and then say it's the same thing.
You know, it's funny, that's actually what everybody does. That's why LGBT, that's why women's rights has followers, is because the default assumption is like, oh yeah, I see the parallel. The minority is being hurt. We need to save them. We need to justify them. You know, they're the good guys because they're the minority being hurt.
Right, you know? and anyone that at all says, "Wait a minute, this is a form of social manipulation or something," they are Pharaoh.
Right.
They are automatically cast as Pharaoh, and it's very easy when you have what's this thing Carl Jung would talk about, archetypes. When you cast, that's why stigmatizing. That's why roles like scapegoating is very easy for people to do. You don't have to break anyone down to sophisticated theories. People just do it automatically because archetypes live in the minds of human beings. So if you make yourself the victim, what does that automatically cast roles for everyone else?
Right. They place you in the role of all the victims in the other stories they know. Yeah,
it's central casting. You already snagged up the best role.
Yeah.
You're the martyred victim. You see what I'm saying? And so the audience is going to identify with you. They do in every world play, every stage. They're going to bind themselves to the victim. And then so that's going to automatically cast other players into unfulfilled roles that they have in their mind. Okay, who's going to be the intrusive mother-in-law, but has a good heart, but is really sketchy and wacky? Oh, okay, do you want to do it, Antoinette? Okay, I'll do that. Okay, who's the crabby dad that is always reluctant and biased, and who's going to play that role? Or who's going to be the enlightened son that's open-minded and saying, "Dad, you're so ignorant, stupid, you don't know how the world really works." Who's going to play that role? And 50 other people go, "Oh, I'll do that one." Because I can't be victim, but I can certainly be the defender of the victim. Okay, you're the defender of the victim. Nailed it.
Yep.
And then so all these other better and lesser better roles are taken up. And people that don't want to play that game, they're automatically handed the script of the villain.
Yeah, right.
And you're like, "I don't want it." No, because you didn't want it, now it's so automatically assigned. And that's what it is. I call it going for the gun. When you set that gun in a situation and someone plays, they're the victim, and everyone's going to go for roles, that's the gun placed right in the middle. Everyone's going to scramble, and the person that doesn't want to play it gets the worst job.
Gets to be the bad guy.
And they get to be the reluctant bad guy. I don't want this role. And the problem that they don't want it, because they actually don't want to play the game. They want life to be fair. They want people to not do that to other people. And that's, of course, what the tyrant would say. Because you like status quo, don't you? That was working for you. You're like, okay, you're right, this isn't working for me. This is not cool. You know what I mean? We were all friends 5 minutes ago.
Turned itself on its head.
So where I'm going to go with the mega point on this kind of stuff, I'm just trying to say that people are malleable. People will jump to the cues of what is going to be considered like the role you need to play. And so they call it LARPing now. What's interesting is
live action role playing.
You got it.
I didn't know what that meant when you said that first in one video.
Yeah, because check this out. When I was in the military in the early 80s, this is when Reagan was in charge, I was hearing through naval intelligence that they were going to throw at least $2 trillion, over $1 trillion, through naval intelligence, I was being told this, into the idea of computers getting in everyone's homes and creating games, actual virtual games that simulate war, battle, and other sociopathic antisocial behavior. This is in 1983, I was hearing that. Was there any video games that had anything to do? Because they wanted to create what they call the universal soldier, that an entire society is going to be already trained in simulators in their own homes. So out of that, get ready, because now comes the crescendo. That's why they poured all that money into Silicon Valley. They used the .com scheme as a reason to dump tons of federal money into software development, and especially in the gaming community. Because it was that was a training device we all used. We were in simulators all the time. Yep. In the military, this was super high-tech stuff. The stuff you see now, Call of Duty, even like Grand Theft Auto, or you name it. You name all this kind of stuff that involves sociopathic kind of stuff, role play, guns, teaming up with other people, now to put it on the web where people could interplay in live action. Well, everyone knew back in 83 that this was the way to train people to be social agitants, to widely influence groups of people with mob think, on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And trust me, there was this, I remember we were all talking amongst ourselves and I remember being the one guy who was like, no way, that's way too out there. Right, everyone's going to be sitting there playing like war video games like all day long.
I mean, then it probably seemed unrealistic.
It was, because only the only thing anyone was playing was Pong and Tetris.
Right. Now look at...
And they were saying, no, it's going to be real. It's going to be like real simulated stuff, like, like shoot and game. It's like, oh, come on. Like at the arcades, you kind of do the little pellet gun thing and you shoot the little targets and stuff. I said, no, man. They're going to be subsidizing to turn people into universal warriors. And it's going to be it's going to be training them with narrative, with dialogue, with sociopathic, and listen to the conversations. I'll never forget working at a group home. This kid was playing Grand Theft Auto, and you're listening to all the comments. And I was doing all this research on sociopathic mind structures, going, every single thing that's being said by the characters in Grand Theft Auto is exactly what a sociopath would say. And so people have the power to attach themselves to these avatar identities. It's the very essence of acting. All acting had masks, and people would throw themselves into those masks, and that's why you get a character, you get an avatar, and you throw yourself behind that identity. Now it's playing itself out in society because we've all gotten the social cue. It's time for LARPing. Jumping in, and we're going to be anti-fascist. They're all LARPing. They're all trained universal soldiers.
That's an interesting connection right there. So they're just acting on what, like, because
they're training. They're training.
It's the young generation, the millennials that were raised in a generation with video games.
That's what they said. They're looking to raise an entire generation on those games. And I was hearing this in 83, brother. That's why I'm freaking out. I'm even telling my friends. I talked to Bobby Breed. He says, I remember that. I said, aren't you tripping out that it's actually happening? I was saying, it's unbelievable, Dave. That's why I'm a Christian now.
Wow. So, and then I remember watching a video where one guy was talking about how, like, Twitter, these other social media things, because, like, more video games are going to be, like, more marketed towards young men. Mm-hmm. It's going to, that's just where the appeal is going to be. But like women and whatnot, they like Instagram and all these other things, and they're saying people are becoming addicted to that because you get an reward. It's like a reward.
Narcissism.
Like,
women are going to be trained as narcissists, and men are going to be trained as sociopaths. two of the fixed uh, uh, personality disorders of cluster B personalities that cannot be changed after you become them. And Satan is producing a narcissistic, running alongside of a sociopathic society. And if you know anything about that kind of a mindset, then turning it into a collective mindset, yeah, let's start talking about the Omega point pretty soon here.
Okay. Yes. Well, I'm trying to think of like my friends, like in college. Let's see. Oh, here's another thing. So then young people, right? So they're narcissistic, and they're they have antisocial behaviors, and then now they're not relying on their parents, who have gone through life and have had the experience of life, but now they're relying on their friends because they can connect to their friends through like live chat on the video games or through like social media. So now that's their structure of who knows best is the people that are
familiarized in their world, especially when you have
right.
the illusion. I have a whole book called In the Shallows. And In the Shallows is about the appearance of knowledge because you're getting all this easy Google access, algorithmed knowledge that is at instant access. So you actually think you're smarter than you are, but you haven't even gone through analytical process or anything else. So you can quickly access data, but your ability to process deeply from beginning to end is completely almost non-existent because they're getting all their knowledge from this very linear concepts. So they can rattle off and chat off a bunch of knowledge to each other and pass on knowledge to each other, but they're pseudo experts. They don't have a genuine cognitive reasoning process that can take them through an entire critical thinking process. And people like Jordan Peterson and stuff like that are picking up on the lack of critical thinking that's out there.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I like Jordan Peterson, and I watch him sometimes. But yeah, like right, and it's the psychology. It's interesting, the psychologist. It's like psychology has that really dark side, and you see a lot of like messed up people in psychology. But then every once in a while, you get the guy that's like most sober in the social science.
Yeah. Well, praise God for that. And here's the idea is that people like this idea of a mind, of consciousness, like
Yeah.
what folks don't understand is that a lot of your consciousness is handed to you. It seems like it's always autonomous, it's always something that is original with you, all this kind of stuff. But that's every good con game. Every good con game involves you coming up with the idea that all the cons around you are like, you know what I mean? There are all these little tricks to cue you into what you think is an original thought. And that is so much of a science that a lot of people don't understand how much of a science there is. A lot of people actually think that their consciousness and their opinion is based on original thought, and it is absolutely on a prefabricated form that's already out there in what's called the noosphere, general consciousness. You just pick up on it. You don't even have to analyze it. You have strong opinions about things that you're thinking, why do I have a strong opinion about that? Because we are absolutely offended by critical thinking when someone takes us to the task. We think they're hurting your ego. They're hurting your ego.
Right. And that's how it comes across. Like I've had friends that are, believe in this subjective morality, quite a few friends, and they don't know why they believe, and I break it down for them, and most, like pretty much, no, every time, they either don't say anything afterwards or they're like, oh, I don't think I believe that. And it was just a simple process of just going through the logic, like A, B, C, D, E, O. That doesn't actually work.
No, the O does because they go, oh. Because, like, the perfect example for me is when you get people that are, LGBT folks, whatever, and then you have Muslims, and then they're like, these LGBT folks are vehemently frothing at the mouth, defending wanting Muslims and build Muslim communities, and they're an underrepresented, oppressed group and all this other kind of stuff, and literally saying, okay, let's break down what Sharia law, what Islam teaches, and how you would be the first people to be thrown off buildings in Sharia law. There's no tolerance for your point of view whatsoever. You are absolutely defending the wolf that's going to come in and eat all of your chickens. you know, in this way. And when you break that down to folks that are so rabid in the kind of righteousness that they feel, the righteous indignation is what seals this kind of ego trip that everyone's on. And when you break down the logic, you're taking away their righteousness. You're taking away what gives them identity, what gives them the moral indignation that gives them meaning, passion, identity, expression. And say, wait a minute. So you start to say, don't conflate these two things as being the same thing. Let's show that you are absolutely putting two things together that is not going to work. You become the enemy because you've ruined what we would call the fantasy, but they would call it, you've ruined my reality. You've ruined my reality. I gained self-esteem. I gained identity. I was involved in something bigger than myself. This is an idea, a feeling, a passion, an unanalyzed experience that was real amongst those people, and being in the streets and being morally indignant and casting blame and roles and labeling people and saying, if you're this, then you're that, and I don't care. They're saying, no, those two things don't put together. Actually, this, being a Republican, being a Nazi isn't the same thing. And all these like gay Jews, like such as Milo Yiannopoulos, people like that, saying, how can I be a homophobic Nazi? I'm a gay Jew. They're all saying, no, you're not.
Right.
And so they won't even deal with the obvious contradiction, because you're not, to them, you're not breaking down truth. You're taking away their reality. I can't believe those words even left my mouth, because they're not the same. You can't have reality and truth be as if they're mortal enemies in a ring fighting over,
It wouldn't make sense. And it's funny, even those people too, they get upset when like a white person is cast in a certain like ethnic film or something like that. And I always think when I see that is like, you must be living in fantasy if like a purposely fanciful movie comes out and you're emotionally attached to someone having a creative license over it. Like, it's like that became part of who you were at some point, because if you feel something.
Well, you're bringing up, this is going to segue right into the Omega Point stuff that I think is so fascinating. Because the irony is, it seems like there is this kind of almost Nazi fascist tolerance dictatorship that we're all going to tolerate and put all these people under the same banner. But here's the trip, is that you think they're a bunch of nonconformists, but they are the biggest conformity Nazis ever. Conformity is what they're about. And they can live with that form of conformity. Do you know why? Because it makes everybody righteous. Nothing is ever called out for being wrong. Nothing ever is given the label other than the possibility of you showing up. It's like the 10 Commandment law, showing up and exposing everything for being sin. In the book of Judges, it says everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Before the flood, it says that their hearts were wicked continually, evil continually. You know what I mean? But it says that because of their sin, the God presented the law. So it says that it made sin apparent. The law made sin revive in their minds. Sin, we're talking about guilt. Sin means coming under legal condemnation. And everyone says, what a party killer. What a buzz killer. What a cold shower. What a wet blanket, that God would show up and say, you guys are so far off that I'm going to tell you how far off you are. That reminder will be and is the identified hostile party. You're the one turning all the lights on the party when everyone's trying to make out. And then you find out that your best friend's making out with your sister and you want to kill him. So, so the idea...
There you go. That's one way to put it, David.
Hey, I am the worst at illustrations, but they're at least memorable.
Yeah, you won't forget that one.
Yeah, I hope not. I want you mad now. But I mean... Okay. But anyway, that's the idea.
To the mega point, right?
Yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there. God help us. But this is the idea: is what would society subconsciously? Because I don't think that the omega point is a conscious thing. I believe that maybe intellectuals are into it, which they are. The Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who is the Jesuit mystic, pantheist slash evolutionist, who was a paleontologist, who was a part of the Peking Man hoax and a part of the Piltdown Man hoax. He was the major player of both of those sad hoax to try to prove this process of evolution. Evolution was a theological position way before it was a science. So a lot of people think, well, true science discovered evolution, and that's not how it worked at all. Darwin set out to present proof for the concept of evolution as it was a theological point, and that's the whole idea of what they would do. They would bring, quote, evidence in these philosophical debates all the way from Mars Hill to prove that what is so metaphysically should show itself in field demonstration, what they call existentialism, that which can be experienced through physical senses. So where am I getting to with this whole idea is that this this idea of oh wait, I'm sorry, I got distracted with Darwin for a second on this whole thing. Oh, Pierre de Chardin.
Okay.
Chardin. So he really attached himself to the monastic disciplines that really were into these metaphysical concepts that you find in Jesuitism. Jesuitism studies all of those mystical disciplines in the monastic disciplines, especially the Dominicans. The Dominicans and the Franciscans.
Is that the North African?
Yeah. Well, eventually, yeah. Well, they get all that stuff from North Africa. All that was really the hub is North Africa for all the way from ancient times, way before Christianity. North Africa through Egypt, Memphis, and all that area, through the Sinai Peninsula, all of that area there was where all the Eastern ideas came from on their way to Europe. Everything was filtered through North Africa. Everything. For centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries, even before Christianity was there. That was always a hot spot for mysticism and mystical concepts. And they always made their way through North Africa up through Europe, even in the time of the Greek philosophers and stuff. So that was a place that was rich and steeped in all kinds of tradition of mystical concepts. And they would go and live in these caves and out in the mountains, and there were stories after stories of men that would float and transport and levitate and have these amazing experiences where they would come back and describe everything that was going on in Paris, at this time and stuff like that. These astral experiences, and then it would get validated through wow, he must, So North Africa was the hub of spirituality in the mystical zone, and that's where the early monastic Christians that made up Catholicism established themselves in Alexandria, Antioch, all of those places. And so they established themselves there. Well, it started to heavily infiltrate Christianity, and that's where Catholicism was developed. Catholicism came through the Neoplatonistic, aligning up all the different religions and then labeling it Christianity because it was the new accepted state religion from Constantine. So that's why you got the word Catholic from. Catholic, where did that come from? That means universal. That was a Neoplatonistic term. A Catholic religion was the goal of Neoplatonism.
So that came from their intellects, that word?
Yeah. But that word was a well-used word trying to create an end product. The end product was a Catholic, where you get the word cathedral from. It's the seat of all knowledge. That's
really interesting.
Yeah, it was the hopes of Babylon. Babylon, when I was a pagan non-Christian, Babylon was the hub of all art, religion, science, creative thinking, whatever, and libraries there. So anyone that was an occultist saw Babylon as, they called it, the city of light. It was a city of light. That's why it's called Ur. Ur means light in Hebrew. So to come out of Ur, to come out of light, that would be intuitive to your journey you're supposed to be taking as an occultist. Why would Abraham come out of Ur? You know what I mean? He came out of light into darkness? That's terrible. Ah, that's what Christians are. They're following Abraham into darkness, into a God that they actually believe is a real person, and they're deconstructing into old ideas of God being a person that talks to other people and all this other kind of stuff. Ur, or Babylon, or the City of Light, which Rome eventually took that title. They stole it from Babylon and say, we're the City of Lights now, this way. And so it's just stealing all of these ancient ideas and putting them together, and that was called a Catholic concept. It's universal. We finally have a religion that now has taken away all of the conflicting elements amongst one another and created a universal religion, a Catholic religion, something in which can be ruled by one man ex cathedra, from a throne, from a chair. And so that's the whole idea of Catholicism. Well, do you think they studied all the mystical disciplines throughout all of the world and all of history? That's why these Jesuits are so knowledgeable, because that is their study. So they're going to be studying Aristotle. They're going to be studying Parmenides. They're going to be studying, all the various mystics and disciplines and stuff like that. So this is the idea of, like, it's a very Catholic idea. So Pierre de Chardin, who was trained as a Jesuit mystic, had no problem with evolution. Has no problem with, you should study Pierre de Chardin. If you want to understand, he was kicked out of Catholicism. That's a way to kind of, what they call, sheep dip you. Like, they're going to say, oh, Spinoza, he was a pantheist. We don't accept him. They go, well, Catholics don't accept pantheism. Then they brought him back in secretly. They say, oh, give us more of your writings, Spinoza. We really like them. Same thing. They did it with, oh, we're going to reject, Pierre de Chardin. And then yet the last three popes do nothing but quote him in their official books. Because Pierre de Chardin is saying that you should read Pierre de Chardin's concept of the Eucharist. He doesn't believe in eating the bread. He believes that accepting the authority that comes from Rome is the Eucharist by keeping Sunday.
That's really interesting.
So they believe that is the cosmic universal Eucharist, an acknowledgement to the power and the authority of ex cathedra.
Okay.
So we are evolving from a Sabbath-keeping society into accepting authority, into where we could collectively bring all religions together and find our rest in one great ecclesiastical mystical authority. And so why did the Catholic Church bring him back in again? Because he had very mystical concepts because he believed in evolution, that God is expressing himself. There's no God really up in heaven. God is expressing himself through humanity and through enlightened thinkers of these mystical disciplines. And God is pushing us ahead to this enlightened place called the Omega Point. And so these change agents are these enlightened people, because they know where society needs to go. We need to go to a place where everything is equal, homogenized. There's no gender. There's no anything. Everything is in this, what they call the atonement. It is a false substitutionary atonement in which you're atoned for. And how do you do that? By not calling sin sin, but acknowledging it as a changing progress of truth, and the fact that we now accept full tolerance of all things that are manifesting emergence, change, self-expression. And it's the context of tolerance, acceptance, is process theology. That is the true atonement, is to get the consciousness of humanity to conform to a very strict tolerance, a dogma of tolerance, a dogma of non-judgment, a dogma of permissiveness. No one's allowed to call sin sin. No one's allowed to bring the law forth. Who do you think this is a setup for? Those who believe,
the law keepers.
Yeah,
and that love Jesus. And
they will become the ultimate Satan in that enlightened society. This,
So they're the bad guy in the play at the end?
yeah, they're the one handed that script that nobody wanted.
Yeah.
Because you're the moral absolutist.
And so the script writers are these Jesuits,
Yeah, but they're,
monastic Jesuits. Those are the script writers, and then you're saying the people or the audience, a lot of them are just along for the ride.
yeah, well, unwittingly, because people are very reactionary. They have an easy psychology. A lot of people are told that they're
broken down.
A lot of people, think that they're more mysterious than they really are, brother. People aren't mysterious. They're not hard. They've been studying mind sciences for millennia. They have perfected it, man. That's why I'd love for me to get some clips of people like Darren Brown and stuff like that, so you can understand that you are absolutely not an original thinker. You don't even have original passion.
Yeah.
People that were all passionate about all the nonsense that's going on now on social media were completely dispassionate people 5 years ago. But they think it was all their own original thoughts.
And then once they get going, too, they keep going.
We're easy, especially since we've been trained. We have been trained with simulators, and I'm telling you, it's God give me the ability to articulate what it needs to be, because I'm telling you, anytime I articulate it, like here in Santa Cruz in a hostile crowd that lives for this kind of fantasy reality, you are the ultimate bad guy. I mean, people will come at you and say, I can't believe you. This is what I'm talking about. This is the kind of person that is going to keep society held back with this kind of ignorant religiosity. They will go kill the monster real quick out here. Yeah, it's funny because they preach tolerance. They preach tolerance. So whatever you do, don't get a heart attack because of the constant contradiction that's so apparent. If you could soothe yourself through all that, you're a better person. Because because
I don't have, it doesn't bother me to the extent I have to, though. If I get a chance, I try to break everything down and then ultimately tell people, I objectively believe in the imputed righteousness of Jesus Christ.
I believe in something more real than this. Now that's the bottom line. The bottom line is that we're being fooled and told a lie that is less real and this is more real. When we have everything to prove to us that this is less real because we keep dying. If we're so real, why are we dying?
And when Jesus comes back, they're going to have to look into his eyeballs.
Yeah. And eyeballs that don't go away. You might go away, but those eyeballs don't go away.
Right, yeah, that's weird. It's I don't even know what it's like. Do you have a illustration for that?
No, I mean, you know what? It's an overused illustrations that pastors use in sermons, talking about the battleship sending signals.
Yeah.
And saying you need to move. I'm a battleship, and then the message comes back. I'm a lighthouse. Change your course.
Oh, right, yeah. No, but that's good though. And I feel when Jesus comes back and it's your imagination is revealed. It's you could have said whatever you want. You could have even built your boat pretty large.
Yeah. And you could be a great captain even, because that was the whole idea. It was the proud captain.
You could be smart. Your boat could be clean. You could have just a wealth. It could be what are those tour ships?
Flagship.
Yeah, it could be one of those ships. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, and you could have battle readiness awards and you could have won many battles but the realization is you're dealing with a God that is he's called Yahweh for a reason, and that literally means he exists all on his own. When people ask that really crazy question, but what made God? Then you haven't gotten to the question yet. God isn't made. That's the whole point. He exists. That's what Yahweh even means. It means he lives and exists and breathes, and his whole being is totally of his own. And whatever does live, it's because he's breathed out and put life into it, or if it stops living, it's because he sucked it back in again and it's got no life. All God has to do is blow through his nostrils, and it's a done deal. That's what it uses those illustrations in Psalms and in the Job, that from the breath of his nostrils. So, he could either blow life or he could suck the life out of you. That is what we're all dancing on. We're dancing on the very platform he created, and we're the creatures that he made in his image, shaking our ant fist up against his great nose. And it's a terrible, terrible sight to understand that we actually think that it's the same mind that Satan had. When he's going to say, I'm going to go up against this, and I'm going to change him, and I will change this kingdom. And
it's like the murder.
He's infused that mindset into us.
It's like, so we're using the play, right? And the villain gets killed in the end, and then turns out they actually killed the actor, and now the police are coming.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, this isn't a play anymore.
Yeah, no more LARPing. No more LARPing. Yeah. LARPing sucked you into... You brought all of your fake vampire blood, but you're going to be spilling real blood today. Yeah, and it doesn't feel good. And you're going to be scared. And you're going to be crying out saying, I'm not ready, I'm not ready, I'm not ready. Wait a minute, my life force is coming out of me. Please, no. And then you die.
This is just a joke at first.
Yeah.
We were just pretending.
Yeah, we're all supposed to be screaming in each other's face and, and then make sure that we got the right camera angle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was really good conversation. So if you...
Yeah, we'll wrap it up. So, basically, last kind of thought on this whole thing is that even the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King, it's really sad for me to see that is brought into, and it has a veil of sanctimonious kind of protection even in black churches that I eldered at. I have no problem with race at all, but I kind of wish that I was a black man so I could say, we shouldn't be having this here. I should be able to say it as a brother in Christ. I should be able to say it as a person that's invested in the eternal realities. And that I'm past all this other nonsense. I'm past all the race and past all this other garbage. I'm into being a child of the King. And as a child of the King, you see this, and there is this entire culture of the concept of tillage. Martin Luther King, tillage, Wyman, Schleiermacher, Stewart, all these people are all going all the way back until you just keep going back to pantheism, the philosophical pantheism, and you just keep going back, and it's right back to Lucifer. And a lot of people just don't understand that there's a lot of just acceptance, and it's still under the guise of, well, that's just liberalism, or it's just progressivism, or it's just new ways, a fresh way of trying to look at things, but we're it's all couched in all these sociological righteous good deeds, and it's given its ultimate, where no longer is Christ the victim. All victimology is passed where?
To us. To the human, the person.
So the entire sanctuary of heaven has been cast to the ground.
Every part, yeah. The righteousness, the victim.
Even the priesthood. Wow. The social change agents and people that push themselves to the front are the priests and kings.
Yeah, Hollywood.
We're here. Yeah. The moral indignation. All the white knights and defenders and all these other kind of stuff that go around. And what you have here and it's all cast to the ground. And if you want, what they call it now, not even a negative way, they call this victim thing that's going on. And we're talking about, this is coming from their language. It's not people criticizing it. This is coming from them. They call it messianic rage.
Wow.
Yeah, that's called
real ironic.
So guess what? Once you have messianic rage, you are ultimate righteousness at that point. And anything that is against your rage is against this cosmic insight that you seem to have that nobody else has. And your rage is self-determined and need not be explained.
Wow. That's real concerning if that's really what people think.
Is it seductive? Is it seductive to a narcissistic, sociopathic age? Is it seductive to those that have their 15 minutes of fame because of YouTube and Facebook and everything? Is it seductive? because the culture, we are living in a mystical culture. We call it postmodernism, but everything in our culture, all philosophy, all ideas of ideology, sociology, everything else is coming from medieval philosophy, boys and girls. And all medieval philosophy comes from all of those pantheistic philosophers back in 600, 500 BC. We're all the way back in Babylon. That's when Daniel was in Babylon. That's when the children of Israel were in Babylon.
We're
600
in
BC.
Babylon again.
Yeah, we're in Babylon again.
Well, welcome to the Omega Point.
And on that note, exactly. So what's the gospel saying? Come out of Babylon, my people. Worship him who made heaven and earth. And receive not the destruction that has been assigned to her. Yeah, on that note, have a good day.